Welcome to Commander Central, episode 207, and today we're going to be talking about listener Andy Peraz's deck named Brizella, Voice of Emrakul. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing today, Dana?
I am doing all right. We got the full final spoiler list for M21 this morning, so I was just going over that. There's nothing that wasn't, like, sometimes you get one or two little uncommons or commons that sneak in the full spoiler list. You're like, oh, that's actually quite a good card. None of those this morning that I caught, so the good stuff was all spoiled by someone.
Good. I mean, all your spreadsheets are open, you have your murder board up, you're ready to go.
I didn't start working on it because I knew we were going to be recording this show, and I'm like, I don't want to get too deep into a project and then have to stop to record, so maybe after this I will do that.
Fair enough.
And then I think spoiler starts, we're recording this on a Tuesday, and I think spoilers start now tomorrow or Thursday for, what is a product where you can
Jumpstart.
Jumpstart, there we go. So I think those spoilers start the next day or so as well.
I believe Jumpstart previews go tomorrow and Thursday.
So I think Monday's show, I would imagine, will be our core set preview. So we'll better knock that out and then Jumpstart, and then, yeah, it's that time of year. There's always something going on. So I think we'll just jump into talking about this deck, eh?
Let's do it.
All right. Andy was kind enough to share his Brizella Voice of Emrakul deck with us. That's the Brizella with Bruna the Fading Light as a commander, which I don't think I've ever actually seen as a commander in a deck. So we sent out a few questions to listeners to send back to us when we do these deck techs. First thing we asked was, what is your meta like? And Andy responded, my meta is the LGS I attend when there isn't a play going on. It's
That's
a strong,
good.
Yeah. It's a strong but casual meta. CEDH decks are not played, but everything else up to that is. The pods I played have combos, but are either late turn combos like Niv-Mizzet Curiosity, or require multiple pieces like Azulport Cutthroat, Pitiless Plunderer, Pawn of Ulamog kind of loop. Aggro decks like Krenko do exist and can stomp tables, and graveyard decks are hot right now. And then we ask, if you were to rate the deck, he says most people there play in the 7 to 8 range, looking to win turn 6 to 9. It's rare to have a game go longer than 90 minutes, and they often finish within an hour.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We also asked, what is the goal of the deck? And Andy said, the deck plays control for the first half of the game while trying to ramp hard. Obviously, I need lots of mana to hit my late game Eldrazi. In the event I get some combo pieces, I will start to try and work towards that to get the win, but I do not have a specific combo in mind from the start of the game. On the deck list page, I have a full write-up of the combos I can use to win the game. Over time, the deck has drifted into doing artifact recursion to generate value, but that was never the intention. The main theme of the deck is supposed to be Eldrazi. I've tried to help the deck win more by adding Blackblade Reforge, which is now replaced by a Hedron Matrix for the theme, and which has produced some Voltron kills with Bruna. Lastly, I do have a prepared earlier Brizella in a oversized sleeve, so when he does make the meld work, he has a sleeve ready to do the card. He doesn't have to flip them over and all that messy stuff.
Nice. What are the weaknesses / areas we should focus on is another question we ask. And Andy answers, the main weakness of the deck is early game aggression. I don't have many low-cost creatures, so I often get taken down to 10 or 20 life by the mid-game from those early aggressive decks. It can also have trouble closing out a game if I don't get to one of my infinite combos, as though Eldrazi are big, they still tend to kill people very slowly and take a while to get out. Despite being mono white, it's rare for him to get hellbent with the deck. The artifact draw and top of library manipulation have made it pretty good at keeping cards in hand. It used to be much more graveyard reliant. However, the LGS has a lot of graveyard decks, so graveyard removal is currently trendy, so I've had to back off that.
And finally, we ask for a budget limit for the upgrades we might suggest, and Andy says, no budget, go nuts with your suggestions. This started as a goofy budget deck with whatever Eldrazi I had lying around, but it has been so much fun to play over time, I've pumped a lot of value into it.
So he also mentioned his win condition here is to try to get to a couple of different combos. One is Karmic Guide or Sun Titan plus Fiend Hunter plus Ultra of Dementia, and it uses the Sun Titan or Karmic Guide, Fiend Hunter, and Ultra to mill an opponent out. There's a Karmic Guide or Sun Titan plus Fiend Hunter plus Ashnod Altar or Phyrexian Altar, and those combos work with the above altars to generate infinite mana. And there's an Ugin, the Ineffable Mystic Force, and Sensei Divining Top lets him just basically draw out his entire library. Memory Jar, Smothering Tithe, and Salvage Scout or Treasure Hunter, along with Altar of Dementia or Azhnet's Phyrexian or Phyrexian Altar. It's a much more complicated combo, but each time you crack Memory Jar with Tithe out, you get 21 treasure. So you play Salvage Scout, and you can return Memory Jar to hand and cast it again with the treasure generated. You can just generate a infinite amount of mana looping those to find combo pieces and draw down to basically whatever the win is going to wind up being. So let's jump right in here and take a look at what the deck is running for cards. Let's start with the mana base first here, Max.
Awesome. So there are 36 lands. There are 12 basic planes, not snow planes, just regular planes, followed up by another 24 utility lands since this is a monocolored deck. So there's an Ancient Tomb, Arcane Lighthouse, Blasted Landscape, Buried Ruin, Cryptic Caves, the 3 different cycling lands in white, Eldrazi Temple, Emeria the Sky Ruin, Eye of Ugin, Gyre Reach Sanitarium, Hall of Heliod's Generosity, Hall of the Bandit Lord, Haven of the Spirit Dragon, High Market, Inventor's Fair, Core Haven, Myriad Landscape, Sanctum of Ugin, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, Tectonic Edge, Temple of the False God, and Winding Canyons.
So there's 2 kind of thoughts with playing monocolor decks regarding your land base. You can do what Andy's doing here, where you just run a ton of utility lands because for the most part you can afford to do so, particularly in this deck where there's 19 artifacts and among your creatures there's a handful of colorless Eldrazi as well. You just don't need white pips very much, so you can get away with, running 30 plus utility lands, I guess not 30, 20 plus utility lands, and have it not really hurt you. The other alternative way to do this, and this is what I'm doing in my mono white deck, is still running a density of basics. I think I have 26 in mine, but I'm using things like Cage Sun, Gauntlet of Power, and Extraplanar Lands to basically double the mana I'm getting off of those. I don't know if one is necessarily better than the other because you can get a lot of utility off utility lands. Probably depends on a combination of how the deck plays and what your playstyle is. This deck, however, the CMC isn't terrible. It's 3.3-ish. That's not bad. But there are some big heavy beaters. The commander requires 7, which means the next cast requires 9. I don't know if it would be better off going with the mana doubler route unless utility lands or not. I just wanted to mention it because it is an option, and I think it might work better than this. So I don't know. I'm not going to say do that or make that change, but I wanted to point it out that it is an option that might possibly be beneficial. Do you have any thoughts on which one of those would work better here, Max?
Seeing that this was originally an Eldrazi deck, I think how the land base is now, so you have enough colorless mana symbols to generate the mana for some of the Eldrazi or even their abilities, I think just makes sense.
Yeah.
So bulking up more on basics and putting in the doublers, I don't know how well those are going to work when you need the colorless pips for some of these cards.
You do, yep.
But, I think this is kind of the rare case where you want it to go this way versus the way you run your Dejaru deck.
I tend to agree that this is probably better served being ran with a bunch of utility lands like this. I tend to think that's probably better too. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there, but I think that's correct. Any utility lands you'd like to see here or you think probably aren't that useful?
A couple that I would like to see here would be Mistveil Plains, just because there are enough white permanents in the deck to get it to trigger, so it's another way to recur cards out of your graveyard. And the second being Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. I know I just said a lot of the Eldrazi have colorless abilities, but you can still use all that white mana to recast Bruna for the 4th time, or cast, an Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, because it is just generic mana, not the Wingding.
In the thing about Nykthos, at least, if you don't have enough permanents to make it tap for a useful amount of mana, it still taps for colorless mana. There's not much downside to it, other than nowadays it's like a $25 card, so if you don't have one from way back in Theros, you have to then go spend the money. I do think if you had one, I would run it just because, like I said, there's no downside to it, and the upside is once in a while you're like, oh, I have Bruna out, and I have, Blind Obedience, and I have Knight of the White Orchid in play. I can tap it for, to come out 2 mana ahead, or 3 mana ahead, or 6 mana ahead sometime. You're not losing much, and you are coming out ahead, so I would probably run that as well. And he mentioned a lot of graveyard decks, and there's no Scavenger Grounds here.
No, but I think there are some other pieces in the deck that screw with graveyards, but Scavenger's Ground, it does produce that colorless mana symbol, so...
And there's only one land removal land, Tectonic Edge.
Yeah.
I'd be very tempted to want to put one or two more of those in there as well, but that could be a meta call. I will highlight a couple cards here. Eye of Ugin. Colorless Eldrazi spells you cast cost 2 less. There's a couple of those in here. That's useful. You can also spend 7 and search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it in your hand and shuffle your library. There's a couple of those, I think. Ulamog and Emrakul primarily, so you have a land that can go fetch up your big beater Eldrazi Kozilek as well. So that's a card you don't often see. It was a beating in Modern for a while, but I don't think you see it in Commander very often, particularly in a white deck. So I wanted to point that out as kind of a cool card. And Shrine of the Forsaken Gods taps for a colorless, or it taps for 2 colorless, but you can only spend this mana to cast colorless spells, and you can only do that if you control 7 or more lands. I think it's also a land people tend to forget about because it's not really good in very many decks, but this is one where it is.
Right.
And I actually run it in my Vela deck as well. For kind of the same logical reason he runs it here. It always taps for a colorless, unlike Temple of the False God. So, if you're in a deck with a ton of artifacts, or in this case Eldrazi, you can afford to have a lot of colorless sources. And once you hit the threshold where you can tap it for 2, again, you have a bunch of colorless sources that you can spend that double mana on. So I think it's a card people forget about because it's bad most of the time, and it didn't do anything in Standard really. But in this kind of deck, it winds up being quite good. So I'm glad to see that included here as well.
Yeah. I'm kind of interested to hear why Emiria the Sky Ruin is in the deck. Basically, because you need 7 or more planes to use the ability, and he's only running 12 planes. So
there's not a lot of ways to get... there's a couple cards that let you go get extra planes, put them out, but not many. I think it will be tough to hit that threshold. I tend to agree.
I think swapping this for Mistveil planes might just be better. I think you're going to hit the Mistveil planes trigger more often.
I think that's probably right.
I would also like to know the reasoning behind Winding Canyons being in the deck. It does add a colorless to your mana pool, but you can also pay 2 and tap it, and then essentially your creature spells have flash for the turn. It's from Weatherlight, and I'm just trying to figure out what you would want to flash in. Maybe the Sun Titan or the Karmic Guide, but that's making those cost 7 or 8 mana after paying the 2 for Winding Canyons.
My guess is it's a situation where there's not a lot of downside to utility land, so again, if you just use it for colorless mana, it's not a big deal, and if once in a while you happen to have 2 extra available, you can just wait till the safest point in time, before your turn starts, so then do the flash in my Knight of the White Orchid or my Karmic Guide or whatever it is, so it doesn't get hit by a board wipe or something.
Gotcha.
So that's my guess.
And if this deck was originally built by cards he had, that makes sense as well.
And when you're building an Eldrazi deck originally, a colorless deck, you have to sometimes dig pretty deeply to get enough colorless lands, particularly before the wastes were a thing.
Yes.
To round it out. So should we jump over and take a look at the creature suite? We usually do creatures last, but let's do creatures second, just to shake it up, Max.
Works for me.
We're looking at 24 creatures here. Quite a few of them are colorless. I'll do the colorless ones first. We have a Burnished Heart. We have Emrakul, the Promised End. We have an Endbringer. Kozilek, the Great Distortion. A Matter Reshaper. An Oblivion Sower. Solemn Simulacrum. Thought Not Seer. And Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. For the white creatures, there's an Eldrazi Displacer. An Extricator of Sin, which is a flip card from the Shadows of Innistrad set. Fiend Hunter, which is part of the combos we mentioned. Gisela the Broken Blade, which is the other half here that works with the commander. Karmic Guide, Knight of the White Orchid. Lone Rider, another flip card. Recruiter of the Guard. Salvage Scout, part of a combo. Sun Titan, also part of a combo, and just always a good card. Thalia's Lancers let you tutor up a legendary card and put it into your hand. Thraben Inspector, Treasure Hunter, and a Verge Ranger is one of the new cards that lets you kind of even up on lands from the most recent commander set. So, Max, what do you thought on this creature suite here?
There's some Eldrazi. There's not a lot of Eldrazi, and I think we first got the notes, I'm like, sweet. I'm going to expect to see, a couple, a dozen or more Eldrazi, which isn't the case here. But he definitely is running some of the better ones, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good utility here interspersed among the combo pieces, too. Things like Recruiter of the Guard that lets you go get a creature with toughness 2 or less, lets you go get one of those combo pieces, things like that. So it kind of at first glance looks like a random collection of creatures, but they all really have a role here for the most part. They're part of a combo or way to go get a combo, or, like Burnished Heart and Solemn just generating value in white, which you kind of tend to need at times.
Mm-hmm.
And they're colorless, and that works with both the Heart and the Solemn Simulacrum. So, you can cast some of those utility lands and use the things that care about having colorless creatures in this deck. So that's all. Actually, I had a tough time coming up with stuff to do with a creature suite here. Were there any suggestions you had that kind of jumped out?
I do have a few that might be able to slot into this deck that are just kind of good utility Eldrazi. Mm-hmm. First being Bane Bala Ged. This is a 7-drop, 7/5. Whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So this isn't as bad as Annihilator, in my opinion.
Right.
Just because it's 7 mana to cast, it doesn't do it right away. And, you can get rid of the creature.
Yeah.
And it's not, I feel like Annihilator just has this stigma on it, it's Annihilator, I don't want to deal with that, or play against someone like that. And then my next one is Conduit of Ruin. This is a 6-mana 5/5 Eldrazi. When you cast it, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with CMC 7 or greater, reveal it, and shuffle your library and put that card on top. And then the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less. So you're going to go tutor an Eldrazi that you may or may not need right away, but it's also reducing all the other creatures in your deck. So there are quite a few creatures that have 2 or more colorless mana on their casting cost in this deck. My final suggestion would be Reality Smasher. This would be the one for sure I think should go in the deck. Reality Smasher is 4 generic mana and a colorless for a 5/5 with trample and haste. And when it becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, counter it unless its controller discards a card. I don't see that being a big issue in EDH like it was back in Standard when this was a powerhouse.
Right.
But a 5/5 with trample and haste for 5 is really good.
Yeah, I think all 3 of those would work. The problem I had, and I looked at your list and I was like, oh yeah, those all 3 make sense, and I really couldn't think of anything that I wanted to add beyond those 3. I then had a tough time, sometimes we're I would add this and remove this. I had a really tough time finding suggestions to remove. I feel like Solemn Simulacrum isn't that amazing these days for 4 mana, but it's not like it's a bad card. I think it's just not as good as it was, 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 8 years ago, whatever it is. The game has kind of moved past it a little bit, but it's not bad, particularly in this deck that has quite a few sack outlets, so you can get the draw trigger kind of on demand versus waiting for a board wipe or waiting to chump block or something.
Yeah, for sure. Finding room for these cards will be tough. I agree. I didn't go that far to find room for them just because all the other creatures in this creature package are kind of utility. They are part of combos or something like that. Or it's such a difference in converted mana costs that it's do I really want to cut, Extractor of Sin, a 3-drop for a 7-drop, Eldrazi. Right. It's just something, that maybe Andy can take a look at and, maybe slot one of them in and just try it out.
And like I mentioned, Solemn, Thraben Inspector doesn't jump out as being that particularly great of a creature either, except for both Thraben Inspector and Solemn are part of one of the combo packages he had. So yeah, it was really, there's, particularly on the creature suite, there's a lot of pieces there that it's a bit of a Jenga situation. You don't want to pull out the wrong piece and have the tower come down.
Right. I do think that Solemn could probably be cut just because there's only 12 planes, so...
Right.
How many, if you loop it, how many times can you really go get planes,
right,
if it's late in the game?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So let's jump over to the artifacts next. How about that?
Perfect. So we have 19 artifacts. So we have the Altar of Dementia, Ashnod's Altar, and Phyrexian Altar, the 3 altars that are all part of the combos mentioned earlier. We have Ashes of the Fallen, Expedition Map, Hedron Matrix, which was mentioned in the notes, a Mana Vault, Memory Jar, Mind Stone, Mystic Forge, Scroll Rack, Sensei's Divining Top, Shadow Spear, Skull Clamp, Soul Ring, Soul Guide Lantern, there's some graveyard hate, Swiftfoot Boots, Sword of Light and Shadow, and Thran Dynamo.
All right, so what do you think of this group here?
This was a little harder to kind of look at. I instantly went, oh, we're in mono white. Let's throw in mono colored artifacts that we would typically suggest for these type of decks, like your Endless Atlases. But when you're only running 12 planes, it's kind of hard to make Endless Atlas work.
Yeah. And I like Endless Atlas a lot in my mono deck, but like I said, I'm running 26 planes or something. With 12, gets way more difficult to hit that. And similarly, I'm a big fan of Tome of Legends in my mono white deck, which requires you beyond the first draw at least to have put your commander into play, or at least or attacked with your commander. And again, that's going to be kind of tricky sometimes when your commander's a 7-drop that people are probably gunning for. I feel like that's going to be less consistent here than it perhaps is in my Jero deck, where I'm regularly trying to cast it, and I usually can swing with him because people aren't trying to kill it. And he also has Vigilance, so I can still swing and leave him back as a blocker. It's really easy in that deck to put counters on that. In addition, I have a bunch of proliferate effects, so if I get one on there, I can oftentimes add a second or a third without having to do things. None of those factors are present here, so a couple of really nice draw effects in at least my mono white deck really aren't options here.
Yeah.
Mystic Forge, though, is a really good card in my Vela deck, and it's a really good card here.
Oh, totally. Ooh, it's going to do a lot of work. I mean, you took out some of the infinite loops with that card in your deck. I kind of like them in this deck just because how else is it going to win besides combat damage?
This deck has less win options in mind, so I completely get it here for sure. That's a really good point. Scroll Rack's always a really good card. The fact that there's also a land tax here, which we'll cover under Enchantments. There's a nice little bit of synergy there where you can go get lands with land tax. Above and beyond what you might need for your landfall, you can get up to 3 lands, so even if you need 1 for your landfall, you'll have 2 left. And worst case scenario, even if you love every card in your hand, you can still scroll rack down 2 to put those 2 lands back on top. And then next turn, when it becomes time for that land tax trigger again, you'll search for lands, which effectively gives you a shuffle. So then when you go to scroll rack again, you'll get 2 fresh cards that you can again swap for those 2 or 3 lands, sometimes more, depending on what you've drawn. That's just some fantastic synergy in really any deck that can run those 2 cards, but especially this one where you're in mono white and you're so limited to what you have for draw options.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about Hedron Matrix?
Sure.
So Hedron Matrix, for those who don't know, is a 4-mana equipment, and it says equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is that creature's converted mana cost, and it has an equip cost of 4. So Andy said he used to run Blackblade Reforged, which is 2 to cast, 3 to equip to a legendary creature, or 7 to equip to a non-legendary creature, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. So right off the bat, Hedron Matrix is 1 less mana to equip to anything, essentially, than Blackblade Reforged. But I don't know, besides Big Eldrazi or maybe some of these angels, what you want to equip it to make sure you get, +4/+4 or +5/+5.
I am admittedly a little surprised too that Blackblade Reforged came out for this, because I feel like more often than not, Blackblade is probably a better version of the same thing.
I think so too. I get this is kind of on theme. It has the giant Eldrazi in the art, but I feel like Blackblade Reforged just might be better overall. Even if you slap it on Bruna, you have to have at least, if you don't have any mana rocks out, you have to have 7 lands out for it. So there's adding 7 to Bruna alone, let alone if you could equip it to Brazilla, if you get the meld off, there's, whatever it's going to be. That's huge. Yeah. So I think my suggestion would be put Blackblade back in.
I feel like it's probably better as well. I was just surprised. I feel like it's probably not in every situation. There's obviously going to be times when you'll have your big Eldrazi out and you can equip this and dome somebody and you wouldn't be able to hit them nearly so hard or even kill them if you were relying on your land count. But I feel like on average, Blackblade is just going to be cheaper to use and more often than not do more damage. And it also gives you the option. You can equip it to more backup plans. I feel like this requires you to have an absolute heater in play, which probably means you're already doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm pretty much with you there entirely. Sort of Light and Shadow, I wanted to mention briefly, all the sort of X and Y, it gives the equipped creature +2/+2. In this case, it gives a protection from black and white. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, you gain 3 life, and you may return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I'm guessing it's part of some kind of a recurral engine to get a combo piece back, maybe?
Yeah.
But, I don't know, that feels like a clunky way to do that.
I mean, it's also gaining him some life, which is an issue that was pointed out in the notes in the early game. And you can put this on anything easier than something like Blackblade or even Hedron Matrix. And I mean, it dodges majority of removal in EDH.
Yeah.
Giving your creature pro black and white eliminates a lot of the top removal spells, so...
Absolutely. It is a protection package for sure. Yeah, it just seemed kind of odd to see that there is all. And I felt it kind of the same way about Shadow Spear. Again, Shadow Spear is great, and the ability to remove Hexproof and Indestructible till end of turn from permanents that an opponent's control for a single mana is really, really useful too. So it's never a bad card. I just wasn't really expecting to see equipment here.
Yeah, I really like Shadow Spear in this deck just because of, I mean, the buff is minimal +1/+1, but
Yeah.
trample and lifelink on some of these Eldrazi that don't have either of those is going to be huge.
And if someone kills it, it doesn't go away like some kind of an aura that grants lifelink as well. It's there to reuse next time you cast something. Memory Jar, super cool card. I like to see that in any deck, and then that's still got a lot of great synergy with Smothering Tithe. Any other final things you want to mention before we move on here?
I guess my only other note on artifacts would be you're already running Mana Vault and Soul Ring and Duran Dynamo. If you happen across one, I don't feel bad about putting a Mana Crypt in this deck.
Nor do I. Because I run Mana Crypt. I think I have it in one deck right now. Do you have?
I don't have it in any deck. I don't have one in any deck yet.
And there are situations where I'm like, the power level this deck plays at, I don't need a Mana Crypt. I feel like in this deck, it's the kind of thing like no one can complain when your commander's a 7-drop commander who isn't that scary, and your main concern is trying to get the meld just for cool points.
Right.
I think almost anything you're gonna try to do to enable that seems pretty fair to me. All right, should we pop over and take a look at sorceries?
Let's do it.
There are 6 of them in this deck. A couple board wipes, All is Dust, Austere Command, Hour of Revelation, and Rout, as well as 2 recursion spells. Open the Armory, I guess is a tutor spell I should say, and Steel Shaper's Gift. Open the Armory, searches your library for an aura or equipment card and puts it into your hand. And Steel Shaper's Gift, search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So both of those get some of the equipment we were just talking about in the artifact segment. Board wipes, start with mentioning All is Dust here. This is a really good deck for this. Forcing a Sacrifice gets around a lot of things in the format. And it dodges anything that you have those colorless also dodges it, including, the 19 artifacts in the deck and the half a dozen Eldrazi and your commander when flipped over. They also don't have to get sacrificed to it, so I like seeing that sorcery here as a board wipe. Austere Command is really, really versatile. Everyone is a big fan of that card. Hour of Revelation is almost always just going to be a 3-mana Akroma's Vengeance. It's 3 white, but it costs 3 less to cast if there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield, not even like under your control. So that's very often going to be a 3-mana board wipe on turn 4 if you need it to be. Just from basic lands, everyone not missing land drops pretty much gets you there. So really efficient spell. Rout kind of does the same thing. You may cast it as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it, so it can be a 7-mana flash board wipe. But, if you don't, it's just a 1 more mana Wrath of God. That's not a bad trade-off for the versatility of that either. Myself, I feel like I would probably run Cleansing Nova over Rout. I think the versatility of casting at flash speed is good, but being able to target whatever permanent type is giving you problems kind of with Cleansing Nova, I've loved the card as long as I've been running it. So that's probably one change I would make here. Are there any from you, Max?
I too am not a big fan of Rout. I get being able to cast it at instant speed, but for 2 mana more, I don't know. Do you want to... I feel like you're always casting it when you're behind.
Yeah.
Especially at instant speed. I would swap it out for an instant in like Settle the Wreckage, where you can cast at instant speed and exile all attacking creatures. But yeah, that controller gets lands, but it exiles, which is the best part.
Yes, yeah.
You could also replace that for Winds of Abandon. That's a sorcery speed, exile wrath. Or a card I've become a fan of is single combat. So it's 5 mana. Everybody sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. They pick one and then sacrifice the rest. And then nobody can cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. That has come in handy quite a bit in the 2 decks I run it in. So I would recommend looking into that card as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I see you have one suggestion down here.
So yeah, my other suggestion would be Gift of Estates. It's just another kind of land taxi card. If an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 plains cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So this would work if you put Mistral Plains into your deck. You can go get that, along with 2 other basic plains. It's just a nice turn 2 play if you're like player 3 or 4 and someone else has 3 lands,
And it's also relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, it's like $1 and it costs 2 to cast, I think.
Yeah, it's quite an efficient card, and it does a good amount of work in a mono white deck that doesn't have many ways to do those kind of things.
Yeah.
All right, should we go take a look here at the enchantments we're running?
Okie dokie. So there are 4 enchantments. There's 2 kind of tempo cards, Authority of the Consuls and Blind Obedience, which make opponents' stuff come in tapped and you gain some life off of them. Land tax, like Dana mentioned earlier, and Smothering Ties, which was mentioned in the combo pieces down below.
I don't have much. I mean, Authority of the Consuls and Blind Obedience don't stack, and I wanted to say you don't need both, but I feel like in this deck where you're trying to slow people up,
yeah,
particularly if there's like Krenko decks that tend to have haste or something, I think it makes sense. They're a good deterrent to keep people from swinging at you.
I definitely like both of them. I run both of them in my Regna and Krav deck just because I need to slow down everybody else as I kind of build up my token army so Krav can eat at the buffet.
Yeah. And Smothering Tide is a great card. We already mentioned land tax, so there's not much I would change here. You know, you have Ghostly Prison written down, or did I write that down? Because I was thinking Ghostly Prison. One of us wrote it down.
I think we both wrote it down. We'll both take credit.
That's a good way to defend yourself in mono white, too, basically playing the white propaganda that can buy you time if you need to buy time.
Right.
But no, other than that, I think that's pretty much what we want from the enchantment segment. Instant speed spells. There's 9 of them brought back. We have Crush Contraband as a removal spell. Enlightened Tutor to go get whatever you need. Flawless Maneuver is the new instant speed spell that you can cast for free if you control your commander, and it gives all your creatures indestructible till end of turn, so it's a way to, for free, save your stuff from a board wipe. Generous Gift, the white beast within, to solve any kind of problem in exchange for a 3/3 green elephant to your opponent. Heliod's Intervention, destroy X target artifacts or enchantments, or target player gains twice whatever X life is. Both fairly useful modes, particularly in a deck like this where you're often down 15 or 20 life because it's just so slow. Path and Swords, both great removal spells, and Warping Whale, 1 and a colorless. You can choose one of 3 modes: exile target creature with power 1 or less, counter target sorcery spell, or put a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature token into play. I would guess this probably gets used just to counter board wipes fairly often.
It must, yeah.
But there's enough, creatures with toughness 1 or less that can be annoying to deal with. It's just good to have them gone. So it's a pretty good utility card, and it's Eldrazi themed. That makes sense. Any instance you wanted to mention?
For flavor, you could run Not of This World. It's 7 generic mana, counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control, but it also costs 7 less to cast if it targets a spell or ability that targets a creature with power 7 or greater. So it'll stop it from hitting the melded generals. But like I said, it's kind of just a flavor win. Otherwise, there is stuff like Lapse of Certainty or Mana Tithe you could run in this deck just to prevent some, a couple more counter spells.
I really do quite like the idea of Not of This World. No one will see that coming. The 0 mana save your commander or your Eldrazi. So I think that's a solid include. Listen, it's crazy expensive at this point, but this is a good deck for Teferi's Protection because you don't want those Eldrazi going away or your commander when it's flipped. Once you've invested all those resources in getting to that point, it's just probably the best way to protect your board state in the game. It's, closing in on, I think, $50, so I get why you're not running it. But if there's a card where you're going to start, saving your coffee money in the morning until you can buy it, it would probably be, that would be the one I would recommend for the deck, is Teferi's Protection.
Cool.
You have, a decent amount of removal. You could also run like a Return to Dust or something, but I don't know if that's necessary. You have a couple things here that solve problems. You can also run things like Eerie Interlude or Ghostway to save your stuff against a board wipe, but both of those, because their blink effects will separate Bruna and Gisela if they are melded. So does that become worth it if you can't remeld them till the end of your next turn? I guess it's better than losing them maybe, but it's still not as effective here as it would be in some other deck. I think last but not least, we have 1 Planeswalker here, Max.
And that's Ugin the Ineffable.
6 mana, colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, which is super useful and part of a combo here. He's got a +1, exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless creature spirit token, and when that token leaves the battlefield, put the card you exiled into your hand. So you make a 2/2 spirit. When it dies, you can essentially draw that card. He also has a -3 destroy target permanent that is 1 or more colors. And there's always a permanent worth targeting, so those are 2 useful abilities on the Planeswalker. but I think the static ability to make colorless spells, because it doesn't say colorless Eldrazi or colorless artifact, it just says colorless spells, to make them 2 less is probably crazy useful here.
I would definitely agree with that. And, there's a draw engine baked in, which is also helpful.
Yeah. So what are your final thoughts here? What were you expecting when you saw the deck list and then actually looked at it? How did that differ from what you were thinking we were going to be looking at today?
I thought we were going to be looking at more Eldrazi, as I mentioned earlier in the show, but, seeing all the combos that are baked into this deck, it's really cool. A really interesting way to take something that was maybe just like a pet project of building out of your collection into something that, is sitting at that 8 power rating now, which is really cool to see from a mono white deck.
Yeah, I agree. That was kind of a double twist ending there. It's my Eldrazi mono white deck. Okay, it's going to have a ton of Eldrazi. Well, there's Eldrazi in here, but there are not that many Eldrazi. So that caught me off guard. And then I thought, okay, it's going to be a creature beats deck. It's not. There's a ton of combos here. So it definitely defies the conventional expectations, particularly because you're just from the get-go even starting out with a commander that no one probably expects to see. So yeah, this was fun to look at. Thank you very much, Andy, for sharing it with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all our listeners who support this show in any way they can, whether it's supporting us on Patreon or just bashing that like button in any place you happen to listen to the show. Those things all help us, and we appreciate people like Andy who have us tech their deck out and people who support any way they can. Thank you all very much out there.
Yes, thank you to everybody.
So we will be back on Monday. I think we're going to take a look at the Core 2021 set. I don't think we're going to have Chris back for that one, so I think maybe the week after. I would guess the week after that at the absolute latest, he should be back with us as well. So until next show, I'm Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. Max can be found there at CMDR_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty, licensed via Creative Commons from Kevin MacLeod. Until next time, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.